Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Brain Muffin at the Movies. And Star Wars, well, it's still making news, and they're still making excuses. So from Screen Rant in the too long didn't read kind of category, we're going to see how far we can get through this article before we say, you know what, it's too long, we didn't read it. So, Rise of Skywalker should have used George Lucas's original ending. Now, this has come up quite often. There's actually been some attempts to blame George Lucas for what we got. There's talk of release the full original cut that J.J. did, which was over 3 hours. That was what, for weeks, that's what we were being, maybe months, we were told, be prepared. It's a long movie. And then Kathleen Kennedy stepped in and said, nope, take out 40 minutes. And we got 2 hours and 20 minutes and of a thrill ride that made no sense. So let's see what in the world's going on with Screen Rant. This is very recent. So Disney ignored George Lucas's original concept. Yeah, we knew that. Well, yeah, and I've seen his, some information about the original, what he really wanted to do, and I'm not so sure it was any good. So the Rise of Skywalker should have used George Lucas's original ending for the Skywalker saga, particularly given the final or finale that audiences did receive. Rey Palpatine arrives at the Lars homestead on the desert planet of Tatooine to bury the two Skywalker lightsabers. One originally belonged to Anakin and Luke, and the other being Leia's just introduced weapon. Oh yeah, by the way, Leia was a Jedi. That's why she survived space. While doing so, so we have the Rey Skywalker scene with Force ghosts of both Luke and his sister. And I've actually seen a clip where people were screaming at the screen. And somebody says, "Where's Ben?" And I think that's a fair criticism. I think we should have had, Ben does sacrifice himself and disappear. Why isn't he in a Force ghost? Now maybe that was cut out. It could be also that really wasn't the original end, that something else happened after that, but we'll see. Because, release the full thing. I don't know. It's like the Snyder Cut. Do we really want the Snyder Cut of Justice League? I don't know. While one could argue that such a denouncement is at least somewhat fitting for the sequel trilogy, especially and the 9 specifically, it really helps when you read what's there. And then I'm really high on energy drinks right now. So, and the 9-part Star Wars saga generally. It still remains a problematic one on several different fronts, not the least of which being the fact that Lucas's climax hits some of the same notes, albeit in a more narratively expansive way. Yeah, but people didn't like politics in the prequels. Didn't we just have a skewing? These earlier concepts for brand new and perhaps safer ones. I don't know about brand new. A lot of it's a lot of retread, and it is far safer. But that's a problem. That's actually one of the biggest problems is that desire, overwhelming contemplation of all of the nostalgic nonsense they put into these movies. And it's perpetually a pattern that has plagued the sequel enterprise literally from day one. Yeah, that is. That is true. Putting everything into the proper context will require a quick recounting of George. Okay. So what was his ending for episode Star Wars 9? The story of Star Wars from the original trilogy 40 years ago to the sequel trilogy of today underwent countless revisions and rewrites. Yeah, and that's part of my problem with all this extra special editions of the ones that I grew up with, as he keeps changing different parts of the narrative. Sometimes it's very minor, but when we got the prequels, he retconned so much that he had to go back to Empire and redo the dialogue, not just with Ian McDiarmid replacing the woman that they had originally, but the dialogue itself no longer made sense. And that is a major, major problem when you're making that many alterations. I know there's a conspiracy theory that he did that to get Marsha out of credits, but and maybe that's true. But again, this is where he's too much of a perfectionist, and that's 2/3 of the problem with the prequels. Central to this evolution was the concept of the wills, okay, which we've had, and this is something they could have explored more in Rogue One, because you had some Guardians of the Wills in that, and I don't even remember the character's name, but the guy that was blind, I am with the Force, and I am in the Force, and the Force is in me, and he's able to walk. It's almost like he can see. It's almost like he's Force sensitive. And I think that would have been a very interesting concept of individuals who were force sensitive, maybe not to enough to be Jedi. And we did kind of have this in what I can remember from Splinter in the Mind's Eye. Now, it's been over 30 years since I read that book. But Luke and Leia encounter a woman who is force sensitive, and the Mind's Eye, the splinter of the Mind's Eye that they have, she can feel the force powers coming off of it. Not enough to be a Jedi, but that's an interesting concept they could have dealt with, and Rogue One could have had that a little bit more. And granted, I know it was about stealing the plans and all that, but it would be an interesting weave through there of some of these serendipitous events happen because someone is manipulating the Force at a very small level. And I guess, of course, we have the midichlorian stuff, and they help link midichlorians to sentient life forms. Okay, so it was framing the story of the Skywalkers to being ultimately some type of force entity that may be... Okay, wait a minute. I've got it. Who went from being an ancient order of galactic historians that were framing the story of the Skywalkers to being ultimately some type of force entity that may have been microscopic in scale and that helped link midichlorians to sentient life forms. Okay. The latter was the premise of the outlines of 7 through 9 that Lucas wrote. See this, and I've seen some of this, and I'm like, I don't know if I really liked it. I know it was abandoned by Disney. And I don't know how much that was Jar Jar and how much that was Disney. I know J.J. Abrams said that eventually they had to say, thanks, George, but no thanks. And they wanted to do something for the fans, and that's what he says. And George has even said that. It was like, okay, you remade the original movie, and then you just chat on the rest of everything. That's nothing for the fans. And I think this is why, yes, it brought in over $2 billion. It was a big event and everything else. But the real proof in the pudding is the sales of the toys tanked after the first one, after episode 7. It wasn't like the toys were selling like hotcakes, couldn't keep anything on the shelves. They couldn't make stuff fast enough. And then The Last Jedi came out and toys just plummeted. They were already plummeting. It is the Wills writing their journals of interstellar history that the filmmaker had in mind when first sketching out a possible ending for his magnum opus. Now, that's an interesting concept because it kind of borrows from the Greek idea of the fates, who are stringing together, the strings of time, and then sometimes clip them when people's lives come to an end. The droids R2-D2 and C-3PO, having been the only characters intended to appear in every single film, would be regaling the Wills with the stories of their exploits with the Skywalker family at some point in the future, perhaps even a full century later. This would not only give the franchise a proper methodological scope, putting it in the same league, Lord of the Rings, whose narrative was relayed to future generations by the Bagginses in their diaries. And what I like about that too is it feels less like a diary narrative than Moby Dick. Moby Dick, my name is Ishmael, and that he's going to survive. It would play off the intro that every Star Wars installment opens with a long time going, okay, that's true. Having director and co-writer J.J. Abrams pull such an old feather out of Lucas' narrative hat wouldn't have been unusual in the slightest, despite Disney's interest in forging its own story for the sequels. And it's really not done very well, has it? The practice of routinely going through older screenplay drafts or unused concept art and resurrecting certain ideas was established almost from day one. Yeah. With such movies as Attack of the Clones, including the air whales that were originally created for Empire Strikes Back and Rogue One. I wonder if there was it's been many, many years, but the original Han Solo books, not the 3 that got written not too long ago. I could have sworn there was a being that Solo encounters in outer space. It's like a whale, but it lives in the vacuum of space. Darth Vader's formidable lava fortress that was initially designed for Return of the Jedi. Yeah, that was one of the rumors that was going around. And this is not just Star Wars that does this. If I remember correctly, in Buck Rogers, the TV show in the late 70s, there was a design. Let's see if I can get this right. Actually, I don't remember which direction it went, but there was something to do with Battlestar Galactica There was a design for one of the ships there that they didn't use. They used in the other show, and I can't remember which. I believe Battlestar was first, and there was an unused, the Vipers that they had, there was an unused concept that they didn't use in Buck Rogers. So what I really want to get to, I didn't really look at this. I don't know. This is a rambling article. What makes this R2-D2 ending a mission even more notable is how Luke... Wait a minute. It feels like I just skipped something. Okay. Where are you? What makes this R2... Okay, ending a mission even more notable is how Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy... Okay. Did end up going back to George Lucas to pull out other little tidbits for inclusion. Yeah, of course. In the midst of the original film's creation, Lucas jotted down several different ideas for what both the prequels and the sequels could contain. See, this is some people said he didn't plan. I knew he had notes. Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't expected to be chronologically introduced until episode 2, for instance, and Luke's twin sister, who at the early stage in the game was most noticeably definitely not Princess Leia, would just pop up in episode 8 after it was established that she was being trained in secret all the way on the other side of the galaxy. Okay, that's interesting. Not until 8. I actually like that idea. There was a belief too that in Return of the Jedi we would see someone from the original who was cut out who ends up being his sister. In this earlier iteration, Luke would have confronted and defeated Darth Vader at the end of the Return of the Jedi, but Chief Palpatine himself would still be at large. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So is that his real name? And off-screen, continuing his tyrannical domination. After the female Skywalker would have joined the fight against the Emperor, she would grab Luke out of the seclusion that he forced himself into and then confront Palpatine alongside him, making the Sith Lord's death and the ultimate defeat of okay. See, and there's a possibility here, too, that by the time Lucas got to Return of the Jedi, there had been talks about doing these other ones. He was so tired, had wrecked his marriage, had been through a horrible divorce, and I think he just wanted to be done with it. And that's why Return of the Jedi feels like such a rushed wrap-up. Because that's an interesting concept. I didn't know about that. But we get, him defeating Vader, perhaps still on the Death Star or whatever, and perhaps not. And then, but the Emperor escaping. That would have been interesting. And then earlier this decade, when Lucas finally penned the outlines for the sequel trilogy in preparation for the Disney transfer, he retained the idea of a central female protagonist in the form of a young teenage girl named Cara, who would have similarly fought off hermited Luke and trained under him, sought out. Although under J.J. Abrams' eye, Cara would become the slightly older Rey, and Darth Sidious would be quite literally resurrected for one final confrontation with Ben Solo. See, the thing is once Lucas didn't do that in Return of the Jedi, that idea has to be jettisoned. You could, I guess, perhaps one thing that would make a little more sense is if his spirit was at rest, it was released, and he was possessing someone else. And so it would pretty easily see how these original plot points were still fundamentally instituted. Fundamentally instituted? Well, he killed off the Emperor in 6, so that's not really fundamentally instituting, is it? Another rescue concept was Luke teaching his sister the ways of the Jedi, which made it only as a quite quick flashback. Yeah, so... okay, and there's... Yeah, and I bet you pretty... I wouldn't, and I bet you Cara wasn't a Mary Sue like Rey ended up being. What is she? The Rise of Skywalker. Okay, we're almost halfway. Revisiting Tatooine for the 5th time and having Rey and her trusty sidekick BB-8 walk off into its familiar dual sunset is an ending that is fundamentally moored in nostalgia. Yeah, it is buried in nostalgia. And recreating the Connie Pete's again because J.J. can't do anything original. Instead of treading on its own narrative is what it should have done the whole time. Of course, this is the very same charge that has been accurately leveled at Abrams' previous stab. Yeah, The Force Awakens, which was just god awful. And that's all he did, such as Resistance Celebration sequence, which lifted wholesale. It just, audience left with almost an entire trilogy that looks to the past instead of, it just resting on the laurels of the past. It's all they tried to do. And this is on purpose. Now, I don't know if J.J. had an idea what he wanted to do and was directed by Disney. But considering how unoriginal he is with his Star Trek stuff, this is just, it's like, hey, I'm going to go do the same thing again to Star Wars. It'll work. Well, it didn't work with Star Trek and it didn't work with Star Wars. And now he's going to do some kind of BS with Warner. We'll see what happens there. Indeed, it almost doesn't help that writer-director Rian Johnson opted to pay off that sunset shot himself in the previous century, which makes Rise of Skywalker utilization of it even more of a retread. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Yeah, because him looking at and where they were has two suns. Isn't it two suns? Yet it's a water world. I don't know. Going with George Lucas' original scenario, instead of pushing the Rise of Skywalker into fresher territory, moving the franchise forward, both literally and figuratively and literally, thanks to the would have instead attempting to close itself with a Oberus-esque loop. Ouroboros, I don't know. It also wouldn't have given audience a possibility of even just a little resolution would have on the galaxy's political state. Do we really want resolution? We kind of close out that chapter and let's move forward with something else. Something which garnered considerable attention under Lucas's reign. They could just be a quick glimpse of the New Republic's successor or a reformed and reconstituted Jedi Order and of the Skywalker family itself. It's actually this last item that's most important, given that much hay was made by Abrams' company about Rey's retconned status as a Palpatine and her chosen identity of a Skywalker, the adopted daughter of Han Solo and Leia Organa, and the last apprentice of Luke, which she was not adopted. God. Okay, so this is a long-winded article of baloney. It doesn't really even say much. His original ideas, I guess, and I don't think we have comments. I don't think they do comments. Didn't see a link. No. Yeah, this is horrible. This doesn't really tell me much of anything, but there's the comments. Let's see if it'll behave and pop up. I think it's a damn shame we didn't get, I really am mixed emotions about what Lucas originally had for 7, 8, 9. What I really think he should have done, instead of selling Lucasfilm like he did, if he really wanted to see those movies made, do some treatments for them, some good general outlines, have like Alan Foster or somebody who had written very well for the EU, write the scripts, all of them, and have them write them all first. Write them all, but knowing that things may change as they make the movie, and hire directors. Maybe J.J. Abrams, maybe right, but have them put those scripts into fruition and be as a producer. I think that would have been a much better thing for him to do. I didn't want to see him be the writer director like we got with the prequels. We needed some fresh blood and ideas on how to make these movies, but the scripts themselves needed a bit more coherent. But some of that is me being very jaded from Lucas with the prequels and what he did there, which I thought was just stupid. And it didn't rhyme. It should have been reflective, and it should have been opposite reflections, so that we see Anakin fall from a very high position, so we understand his overwhelming desire to get back and his willingness to basically do anything to reclaim what he had and going to the dark side, as opposed to this, coming from nothing. He has nothing to lose at all, and so it feels very empty when he does lose Padme. He should have had everything to lose by going to the dark side. And then we get a big struggle and his pain. And then his redemption arc makes more sense. So I guess woulda, shoulda, coulda. And maybe, who knows? Maybe Disney can take these ideas and make them necessarily woven into the fabric of the Skywalker, or maybe the rebirth of Skywalker, or some other saga, and do a sidebar, trilogy of some sort that does explore the nature of the Force. I don't know what the R2-D2 arc was. What did I didn't think having the only characters intended to appear in every single film. Will be regaling the Wills with the stories. How's that a twist? Okay. And then with what was proposed for 9 with the was it the Fates, something of the Fates, R2D2 was going to be destroyed, or at least beat up. I don't know if fully destroyed, but that would have been an interesting twist. And Chewie picks him up. But yeah, I don't know. There's a part of me that I know it's a cynical side, but there's a part of me that just says, the original movie, what became known as A New Hope, was lightning in a bottle. And we saw a pullback with Empire. It got darker. People rebelled a little bit. I mean, it didn't do as much. And then Return of the Jedi, it went back up. And there was a lot of belief that we wanted more Star Wars. But the prequels didn't sell. I mean, they did fairly well. Okay. Now, they did take years to really be hated by people. It wasn't instantaneous like people want to retcon history. But people loved the nostalgia of The Force Awakens, but once they stepped back, they realized it had just been turned into a summer blockbuster or a Christmas blockbuster, very empty of meaning and a very limited rewatchability. Whereas the original, you can watch A New Hope, you could watch, or people watch 1,000 times or more. I've seen it, I don't know how many times, dozens upon dozens. But the prequels didn't have any rewatchability either. And, maybe those 9 or so years, because they were in, the original was in production for several years. Well, the script went through multiple rewrites, and he shared his idea with multiple people. I think it goes back in the early 70s. It took several years before it was filmed. Unfortunately, the other ones didn't have that, and that's kind of what's there. And in modern, in the late 90s, to me, this is exactly the same way The Matrix went, where The Matrix was really like lightning in a bottle, and then the 2 and 3 were just horrible. So maybe that's part of it. We don't want to believe that there is no going back. But The Mandalorian is at least hopeful that we can get stories in that universe that aren't the Star Wars, main story. I think something like Rogue One, had it been done better, would have been good. I still want to see the original Gareth Edwards cut, and not the one that Disney execs screwed up and turned into a comedy. And I don't really need an Obi-Wan show, but something, intertwining with the prequels, make, something like what we got with the Clone Wars. I don't mind something in the Knights of the Old Republic, and, or maybe 1,000 years in the future after the current Star Wars. I don't have a problem with any of that. So anyway. So what do you think? Do you think Lucas's ideas should have been given some treatment, and maybe they should have had him as the executive producer and kind of overall guiding and having other writers? I still think the script should have been written by some of the better EU writers. And then, who knows? Maybe someday we'll get some of the old EU will come back or whatever. I don't know. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you. Goodbye. Yeah, what are our input levels? I don't know. I've been popping, so let's take it down. Half. Let's do half. Yeah, and there's still a hum. Let me. Yeah, when I mute, it goes away. I don't know. One of these days. Well, if people would listen and subscribe, we could get this better. I know. That's my fault. All right, 3, 2, 1.